As West African states discuss the response to last month's military takeover in Niger, we get answers on what this means for the country, the region and the continent. Let's welcome to the program Gideon Chitanga, who's a research associate at the African Centre for the Study of the United States, and he's based at the University of the Witwatersrand. Good evening to you and welcome, Gideon. Thanks for joining us on the program. Great to have you. Given all of these different developments and meetings now to try and diffuse the situation there, how possible, from where we're sitting at this moment, does the return to constitutional governance in Niger look, given this chokehold coup leaders have on power? Oh, is Koffi with me? Okay. I thought Koffi was not joining us tonight, so let me just welcome you. Koffi, I mean, how can I ask a question and not introduce you? Koffi Kouakou is Africa analyst and senior research fellow at the UJ Centre for Africa-China Studies. Pardon that mistake, and thank you very much for being with us. Really appreciate your time. You've heard the question there. What do you think?
Well, a long time, my dear. I think we haven't spoken in a long time. But anyway, I think it's really important. The Constitution's already dead. It's suspended. So clearly, there is not much that is constitutionally ordering, or it is really legal. So they're in a moment of transition of what I call, and what many people call, illegality. So which means only the junta has the power to describe and decide whatever happens in Niger. And that's as short as it is. So that means it's not a democratic group of people. They've seized power, and they're going to decide where the country needs to go.
For an expert like yourself, I mean, you have the ability to apply a kaleidoscopic analysis of the situation, to be able to see what's happening internally, historically, and also contemporarily with outside forces. When you look at the situation and appraise how things have developed in Niger, what's your sense on some of the external issues at play here, some of the external, interests at play here?
I think, my dear, this is really big. This is extraordinary. In fact, what the Niger crisis has done, in fact, it has shifted the geopolitical attention from Ukraine, the Ukraine crisis, now to the Sahel. That's the first dimension. And the second dimension, and more important, is that there are external powers and foreign powers that are behind what's really happening. For the most part, there's no way that the ECOWAS, the Economic Commission of West African State, has the power, the resources, the military capacity to attack Niger easily, especially when you have many more countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and now we're hearing, of course, Algeria and then Mauritania. Not only that, you also have a groundswell of populist uprising supporting them. And they are also barricading places, they're organizing themselves. So if those powers that are supporting or funding ECOWAS do force a military intervention, and we're hearing that today was a big day to agree on the next movement, and especially they're saying everything is on the table, including military intervention. If that happens, this region can go in chaos, because we've never seen such a coalition that I call the coalition of the willing. Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and so forth. And that is a serious, serious concern.
And there's something really interesting here. I mean, you mentioned a couple of countries, and I want to add Guinea. I didn't hear you talk about Guinea, Sudan. You might have mentioned Burkina Faso as countries which are currently under military rule. You talked about Niger and just how explosive the situation there is. When you think of what's common and the common thread between all of these countries, I mean, one of the things that an outsider, might see is the value and the richness of what the country has in terms of its mineral and other wealth. Would you agree that that's a common theme here? And if it is, does chaos not present an opportunity for those who would seek to benefit from it?
Indeed, it will, because it has so many dimensions. At the heart of this conversation, I kept telling all my colleagues in international relations, but also observers and commentators, that the terminology they should be paying attention going forward is the resurgence of what's called resource nationalism. the idea and ideal that the resources of a country belongs to the national of that country where the resources are and should be benefiting them. But what we haven't seen for more than 100 years, and even after the independence of most of these countries, especially the one in the Francophone area, is that it hasn't really benefited, those resources haven't benefited people because we have the evidence. You know, extreme poverty is very high. The youth unemployment and unemployment in general is extraordinarily high as well. We see young Africans crossing the Mediterranean, going to Europe and dying in droves into the Mediterranean Sea. That's a terrible indicator that the social well-being is not really working well. And then the other one is the inequality, the widening inequalities. I mean, you may know by now that in most of these countries, you know, the elite are building mansions based on the corrupt money they've already stolen. And then the worst thing is corruption, of course. And those who are benefiting from this kind of chaos are the ones who are funding it. And it is really sometimes difficult for many of our people to understand, or people have been propagandized so much so that they think the focus should be on African leaders. But African leaders, most of them are supported by foreign forces. And those foreign forces are now about to clash and putting Africans against Africans. So Africans will be killing each other now if ECOWAS intervene militarily.
What you're saying is both a sermon and a prophecy, and sorry to use sort of biblical references, but if we think about, you know, verification, replication, leading to the fact that these things could happen elsewhere, the re-emergence of, or not the re-emergence, the recurrence of coups or seizing of power, it happens in countries, as you've just explained, where the gap is so wide between the haves and the have-nots, that is what, you know, risks countries, their constitutional governance and their authorities. Then what you're saying is it could happen anywhere. It could happen in South Africa too.
Powerful statement. In fact, you are just put your finger on something that's really counterintuitive. I happen to have given a talk with some colleagues somewhere. I won't give you the details, but around very high-level policymakers in South Africa. And I brought the questions, and I was laughed at. And every time I hear that kind of laughter, I have the feeling that something might happen because the evidence is there everywhere. And what you're saying is, even in Southern Africa, this might happen. And the movement is so powerful now because it comes from popular uprising from the people. The civilians, the people, they organize themselves, they're unhappy, the discontent move from the populist uprising to nationalistic viewpoint. And then from nationalistic viewpoint, they look at the resource nationalism and say, hey, this is what we want. And we want our sovereignty back. And sovereignty also includes monetary sovereignty, because most of them don't even control their monetary systems. They're under monetary slavery, especially with the French in Francophone Africa. And the next one is the move out of nationalistic environment to Pan-Africanist environment. That's how they start to build and convince people. And you can see that it's spreading from the Central African Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and so forth. So the evidence and the points are there in the sense that they're moving down. And the next one is, after this Pan-Africanist ideal, the military hijacks it and makes it a very powerful congruent and conjuncture for people to say, yes, now we have a force, we can move forward. And that is possible that it might happen in Southern Africa as well, because the if you want the evidence for extreme poverty, inequality, and corruption and so forth, they're all there. And democracies haven't delivered.
We can't fall asleep on the signs. Thank you so much for your analysis, Koffi. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Koffi Kouakou is from the UJ Centre for Africa-China Studies. Thank you very much for your time.